As we have shown in the previous episode and we will see in future videos, Romania has been taken over by Bolshevik Jews in 1944 and again in 1989, and as a result the denial of the Holocaust is punishable by 5 years in jail in Romania. So from the onset we need to make it clear that this video is not denying the Holocaust. A persecution of the Jews during World War II really did happen. Lots of Jewish bankers lost their jobs and were forced to work for a living. Many Bolshevik Jews doing propaganda for communism were arrested, and because of them many average Jews also suffered. This video is only discussing the evidence for this Holocaust, the manner in which it happened and the number of victims. Until 1990 there was no discussion about the Holocaust in Romania, although as we have shown in the previous episode, Romania was led exclusively by Bolshevik Jews after World War II. Apart from a few isolated incidents which we will discuss here, Romania was viewed as an oasis for the European Jews, allowing almost 500,000 Romanian Jews and a similar number of European to escape to Palestine in the west, although Romania was occupied by Hitler's army. After the Judeo-Bolshevik quote-unquote revolution of 1989, the accusations of genocide against the Jews started flowing, with the number of alleged Jewish victims varying widely, sometimes being even higher than the total Jewish population of Romania. The Jews finally settled on 400,000 Holocausted Jews and decided that each one was worth $50,000. And began asking the perpetrators of the 1989 Bolshevik Revolution, which were now leading Romania, for $20 billion in compensation. At the same time, in pure Bolshevik manner, they passed the law that forbids anyone from denying this event. So today Romanians stand accused of a horrible crime and are asked for money, while at the same time they are not allowed to say that they did not commit that crime. The first accusations came from the Jew Matthias Karp. In 1946 he wrote a book named The Black Book, under the leadership of the Jewish propaganda minister of the USSR Ilya Ehrenberg, which we have mentioned in the previous episode. His book was never reprinted since it was a pure propaganda book and was easy to debunk. For example, he wrote, quote, "The Romanians would sell Jews so that they were killed and their clothing was commercialized, and to be cut in pieces and their blood used to grease cart axles." End quote. The same book contains the testimony of a certain Jew named M. Katz, which said Jews were forced to eat excrements. Similarly outlandish accusations came from the Jew Sonia Palti, which said that the neighbors of the Jews in Transnistria were taking advantage of the suffering of the Jewish children and placed their soup bowls under the face of the Jewish children so that they would get salt in their soup from these tears, since salt was not available. The Jewish journalist Hannah Arendt writes that Romanians would display the bodies of Jews in butchers' shops. Since the Jews of Romania were never sent to the Polish concentration camps and there were no extermination camps in Romania, and since the only mass graves were those of about 1,000 Jews which have fallen victim to a German anti-communist purge in Iasi in 1941, the Romanian historians were obviously asking the Jewish accusers for the location of these 400,000 Holocausted Jews. A Jewish quote-unquote historian once said that these bodies were all eaten by stray dogs, the only explanation given so far. Jews also point to a number of cemeteries in Romania which contain the famous soap made of Jewish fat at Auschwitz. This is a lie of the Jew Simon Wiesenthal, which has been exposed decades ago as a hoax. But these cemeteries still stand today and they all have commemorative plaques which remind us about the evil Nazis who turned Jews into soap. Testimonies such as these are meant to support the accusation that Romania holocausted 400,000 Jews. The main events of this quote-unquote Holocaust in Romania are the pogrom of Iasi, the reprisal of Odessa and the relocations to Transnistria. We will discuss each of them in turn and see what the evidence says, leaving Transnistria last since it will reveal the true reason behind these accusations. But first, let's recapitulate the situation of the Jewish community in Romania around the Second World War. The Jews first crossed into Romania en masse in the 19th century when they were chased out of Russia, Austria and other countries, and they began creating problems for the Romanian population, such as the introduction of synthetic alcohol and the taking over of land and abusing the peasants living on those lands, which culminated with the 1907 anti-Jewish revolt which saw 11,000 Romanian peasants massacred. After the First World War, a massive attempt at Bolshevizing Europe began, which involved Romania as well. Bolshevik Jews were doing intense communist propaganda and were conducting terrorist attacks in Romania, as described in parts 11 and 12 of this series. Simultaneously, after taking over Russia, the Bolshevik Jews running the USSR invaded Bessarabia and Bukovina in 1940 and started one of the worst genocides against Romanians in history, leaving over 300,000 Romanians tortured and assassinated or deported to the Siberian gulags. The same style of genocide would again be perpetrated by Bolshevik Jews against innocent Romanians after 1944 when they occupied entire Romania, and the country was led exclusively by Bolshevik Jews, as described in the previous episode, and which left even more Romanians assassinated, imprisoned and tortured, deported or starved to death. This unprovoked anti-Romanian genocide first started when the Bolshevik army invaded Romania after Hitler and Stalin signed the Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact. When the Russian army invaded, the Jewish population of Bukovina and Bessarabia rebelled against the Romanian army, which was ordered not to respond to the Jewish unprovoked attacks. Thousands of Romanian soldiers would fall victim to the Jewish savagery during the retreat towards mainland Romania. During those days everyone knew that the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution in Russia was 100% Jewish and that they were attempting to spread Bolshevism throughout Europe, such as in Hungary in 1919 or in Germany in 1918. This explains the animalistic hatred with which the Jewish population of Bessarabia and Bukovina attacked the Romanian authorities and civilians. On the very first day of the USSR's invasion, the 28th of June 1940, the Bolshevik Jews started wearing red scarves and waving red flags and began writing the famous black lists which contained the names of the Romanian elite that had to be eliminated. Bessarabian Jews such as the lawyers Karol Steinberg and Ted Diner would write these black lists of Romanians meant to be assassinated. In the city of Sinote, as soon as the order to retreat was given to the Romanian army, the Jews began breaking and splitting the Romanian flags, breaking the crosses on top of churches and replacing them with the red Bolshevik flag, and killing innocent Romanians, such as a local Catholic priest and policeman. The newspaper Universal would write that the Ukrainians of Sinote respected the Romanians during those days, but the Jews exhibited such hatred that it shocked even the Soviet army officers. In the city of Chisinau the Jews blocked the streets so that the Romanian civilians trying to escape the Bolshevik occupation could not reach the train station. The Romanian policemen Pascunieli, Matisca Constantin, Severin and Slawich were trying to help the Romanian refugees reach the train station were assassinated by these Jews. At Soroca, the Jews led by the lawyer Michel Flexer occupied the city halls and the police headquarters and assassinated the Romanian Commissar Morafa and his adjutant Ustashu Gabriel. Many Romanian officials were also assassinated when the Jews robbed the truck which carried the treasury of the Romanian Financial Administration. At Vichnita, the Jewish doctor Wiener who led a local hospital tore down the Romanian flag proclaiming that, quote, "The hour of the Jews has come," and he forbade the Romanians from fleeing. In Romanesti the Jewish pupils attacked the Romanian teachers, in Tiina the Jews disarmed the Romanian gendarmes, in Citita Alba the Jews burned down the town hall, etc. At Citita Alba the priests were tortured by the Bolshevik Jews who burned them with cigarettes and devastated their churches. This gang was led by the Jew Abram Karolik which would go to murder the county bishop Grusnfolsku, the priest Petru Sinita, the chief of the train station and his deputy. The list of Jewish anti-Romanian atrocities is obviously much too long for everything to be included here. The foreign press of the day also talked about these Jewish atrocities against innocent Romanians. The Italian Corriere della Sera and Gazzetta del Popolo, the Hungarian Pesti-Ujság and others detailed these atrocities, while the La Stampa wrote how the Jews of Sanoti, Reni, Izmail and other towns organized provisory Bolshevik governments after the Romanian army's retreat. The King of Romania Charles II would also write in his journal about the attacks of the gangs of Jews, on the 29th of June. All throughout these lands the Jews attempted to stop the Romanian population from leaving, together with the Bolshevik army. For example, in Reni the car party boat carrying Romanian refugees only managed to escape the Jewish assault after its cordage was cut. The bloodiest massacre was the one at Fantana Alba, where 2,000 Romanian peasants trying to cross the border were massacred by the Bolshevik army. As we have seen in the previous episodes, the Bolsheviks deported hundreds of thousands of Romanians to work in the Siberian gulags, which explains the desperation with which the Bolshevik beasts tried to stop the Romanians from fleeing. The cavalry brigade under a commander named Postelniku barely made it across the border, with missing soldiers and equipment because of the attacks of the Bolshevik Jews and the Soviet army. This went on even though it was agreed that Romania had 3 days to orderly evacuate Bessarabia and Bukovina. After the withdrawal of the Romanian army, these same Jews became the Soviet commissars that would enact the ethnic cleansing agenda of Moscow, through assassinations and deportations to the gulags. For example, in Sanoti the Jews Salo Brul became the Soviet People's Commissar, Glorbuk became mayor, Hitzig became vice-mayor, and Mir became a prefect. The lawyer Steinberg that we mentioned earlier became a Soviet People's Commissar in Chisinau. The Jewish Dr. Rabinovich took the same function in Chileanwa, etc. When the Romanian army finally attacked the Bolsheviks in 1941 and re-entered Bessarabia and Bukovina, over 150,000 of these Jews would flee into the USSR together with the Bolshevik army, probably fearing revenge because of the assassinations, torture and deportations to the gulags that they carried out during 1940 and 1941. As we have shown in previous episodes, that summer Stalin was going to start his invasion of Europe, so on the 10th of June Stalin also ordered that these Jews would be evacuated out of Bessarabia. During their flee, the Bolshevik army destroyed everything they could, from police headquarters to town halls and churches, while thousands of fleeing Jews burned their homes, leaving the entire land in ruins. As described in previous episodes, when the Romanian army entered Bessarabia and Bukovina in 1941, they found thousands of mutilated bodies of innocent Romanians, mass graves and NKVD torture chambers. Over 300,000 Romanians were slaughtered in this one-year period alone. Overall, throughout the Judeo-Bolshevik administration of Romanian lands, millions of Romanians would die for the simple guilt of not being born a Jew. Unlike most genocides in world history where the average population cannot be blamed since they were carried out by the country's leaders, the guilt for this anti-Romanian genocide perpetrated by Bolshevik Jews cannot rest solely on the shoulders of the Jewish leaders, since a large part of the Jewish population had an active role in the systematic extermination of Romanians. To this day, the Jewish community of Romania refuses to discuss this genocide, for reasons which will become clear at the end of this video. A single shy attempt at acknowledging the Jewish anti-Romanian genocide of the pre- and post-war period came from the former chief rabbi of the Romanian Jews, Alexandru Safran, who said in 1946, quote, "The annexation of Bessarabia and Bukovina was welcomed with joy by some leftist and communist Jews." Before moving on and discussing the Holocaust accusations against Romania, it is worth reminding that in 1940 half of Transylvania was forcefully taken from Romania by Hitler and given to Hungary. After the anti-Romanian ethnic cleansing of 1940, which we discussed in previous episodes, The Hungarians would go on and purge this occupied area of hundreds of thousands of Jews which were sent to the concentration camps controlled by Germany. This area is the only area of today's Romania where Jews were sent to the concentration camps in the West during the war, but we will not discuss it here since Romania had no control over it and the area was run exclusively by the Hungarian army. We will also not discuss the anti-Semitic laws passed by the dictator Charles II in 1938 and those passed by Antonescu in 1942 since, as we have shown in the previous 2 episodes, these were passed in order to appease Hitler, who had a special interest in the resources of Romania, which were crucial for his plans. So apart from the 3 main episodes of the so-called Holocaust in Romania, Jassy, Odessa and Transnistria, the only other event that is used as evidence for the quote-unquote anti-Semitism of Romanians, is the 1940 rebellion of the Iron Guard movement, which saw about 400 people assassinated including about 100 Jews, all of which were identified as communists. As mentioned in part 13 of this series, the Iron Guard at that time was led by extremists and abandoned its original Christian principles and was promptly dealt with by Marshal Antonescu, who removed them from power completely. One other pogrom of which Romania is accused is the one in Chisinau in 1903, but at that time Bessarabia was occupied by the Russian Empire since 1812 and Romanians were just a minority of Chisinau, persecuted and undergoing aggressive assimilation. The majority was formed by Russian speakers, Jews, Ukrainians and Russians, and all power was in the hands of the Russians. So this small revolt of the Russian speakers against the Jews, apart from having almost no victims, did not involve the small Romanian minority of Chisinau, which was at the bottom of the food chain in those days. A second fight between Russians and Jews took place in 1905, this time triggered because the Jews were trying to Bolshevize Chisinau, like they did throughout the Russian Empire that year. They were defeated and would only succeed 12 years later, in 1917. As described in previous episodes, in 1941 Romania was forced to enter World War II against the Bolsheviks USSR. In a time of war, all citizens that side with the enemy are considered traitors and are punished, sometimes without a trial and without committing any crime, like the Japanese in the USA who were locked in concentration camps for no reason, or the Italians and Germans in Britain who were locked in concentration camps such as the one at Haitan. Romania as usual pushed the definition of hospitality and humanity to ridiculous levels and did not take any action against the Bolsheviks that were active on its territory, even though unlike the Japanese in the USA or the Germans and Italians in Britain, the Bolshevik Jews in Romania were violent and very active and the genocide committed by Jews in Bessarabia and Bukovina was well known. They were trying to create a communist party and even committed terrorist attacks such as the Senate terrorist attack perpetrated by the Jews Hanna Porka and Max Goldstein we talked about in previous videos. Although these Bolsheviks, mostly Jewish, were open enemies of the Romanian state and Romania was at war, no measures were taken to isolate them. In 1942, when Hitler began gathering European Jews so that he could kick them out of Europe, the leaders of the Jewish community in Romania finally understood the gravity of the situation and appealed to Marshal Antonescu to disobey the orders from Hitler and offered to keep an eye on the Jewish Bolshevik traitors so that the rest of the Jewish population of Romania did not suffer because of these communists. This is the context in which the Jassy events took place in 1941. We will first look at what both the Romanian authorities and witnesses had to say at that time and at what the modern accusers say about those events today, after which we will show the evidence to see which side of the story is supported by this evidence and which is a lie. During that summer the Soviet aviation was regularly dropping leaflets over Romanian territory trying to convince the population to rebel against the German army which occupied Romania. On the ground, the local Bolsheviks, most of them Jewish, were also actively trying to convince the Romanians that the Russians are, quote, our friends. When the war started, and all throughout its duration, Soviet NKVD troops were regularly parachuted into Romania, to make contact with the local Bolshevik traitors. For example, the gendarmerie in the village of Tatova sent the informative note number 446 on the 6th of July 1944 saying that the Bolshevik Julia Sami, aged 34 and born in the Romanian town of Piatra Neamț, was captured after being parachuted by the Bolshevik aviation. On the 22nd of June 1941 Romania entered World War II by attacking the Bolshevik army which occupied Bessarabia and Bukovina. As a result, the town of Iași, which was just a few miles from the front line, was bombed by night by the Bolshevik aviation just a few days later. Since Iași had a large Jewish community and many of them were notorious Bolshevik agitators, rumors started spreading that Bolsheviks helped the bombardment by flashing lights from rooftops. As a result, the Romanian authorities of Iași, on their own initiative, gathered 500 of the known local Bolshevik agitators. After interrogations, 400 were given a ticket for free passage and released without charges, while the remaining 100, the most hardcore Jewish Bolshevik traitors, were arrested and imprisoned. They stayed in prison until the end of the war when they were released by the Bolsheviks that took over Romania in 1944. These actions are the only ones taken on that day that were ordered by Romanian authorities and were taken without informing the commanders of the Romanian army, since Marshal Antonescu at that time was on the front, and only found out about the events in Iași later. No orders exist for reprisals against the Bolshevik traitors on that day. In fact, no order for the killing or injuring of any Jew on the territory of Romania exists for the entire war period. However, the Romanian authorities were subordinated to the German army which occupied Romania at that time, and the Germans were not satisfied with the reprisals undertaken by the Romanians against the Bolshevik collaborators. After shots were fired on German soldiers from an attic on that day, so they started gathering more Jews. Therefore we need to make it clear that there were two reprisal actions taken against Bolshevik agitators that day. One taken by the Romanian authorities, which left no dead or injured Jew and resulted in the imprisonment of 100 extremist Bolsheviks, and one taken by the German army. After the war, two trials were held, one by the USSR at Sonorti and one by the Israeli at Haifa, and both of them cleared the Romanian authorities of any guilt. Moreover, their investigations said that the Romanian intervened to diminish the proportions of the German army's reprisals. Also, the transcripts of the phony Bolshevik trial of 1946 show that the Marshal Antonescu confirmed that he was on the Eastern Front that day, and later when he heard about the events in Iași he ordered an investigation. He also confirmed that the German commanders told him that the Bolshevik Jews fired shots at a column of German soldiers and killed some of them. The official Romanian investigation confirmed everything we have described so far. It was led by the Romanian General Mihail Racovita, who is renowned for his impartiality as he is known to have judged and condemned even former comrades from the army. His report says that the Germans informed him that after the Bolshevik bombardment of Iași of the 26th of June, Bolshevik parachutists were dropped and were supposed to make contact with the Jewish Bolsheviks from Iași. His report continues to say that on the 28th of June the Romanian authorities were informed that the German army was conducting searches in houses of Jews. After shots were fired in Iași that evening, the Germans started gathering Jews at the police headquarters. The report says that the Romanian authorities of Iași did not know of this development. The Romanian General Gheorghe Stavrescu, who was commanding the 14th Infantry Division stationed nearby, intervened and tried to convince the German commanders to withdraw the troops that were doing searches in Iași and were occupying the police headquarters. He was not successful, but later he managed to convince the German General Hans von Sarmuth to go together to the police headquarters and drive out the German troops. He also released convoys of Jews that were being driven towards the police headquarters, and he also took actions to reassure the Jews that nothing will happen to them, as the Jewish witnesses confirm, such as Leon Stein, Benno Beer, Goran Isaac, Vicezu, Rosalb, etc. The report also confirms that a number of Jews were executed by some Romanian soldiers led by Colonel Emil Mates, and they were acting under the orders of the commanders of the German division to which his troops were assigned to. The Colonel Konstantin Chyrilovsky, the commander of the local police, also patrolled the streets that night and ordered that the convoys of Jews be dispersed and sent home, as the testimony of the Jewish witness Beatrice Simovici says. She also says that she personally asked him to try and release her husband, but Colonel Chyrilovsky told her that he could do nothing since the Germans did not respond to him. It is not known for sure how many Jews were killed by the German army or by Romanian soldiers executing the orders of their German superiors. On the 1st of July, the Romanian authorities released an official statement which said that approximately 500 Jews were executed in Iași. But on the 1st of September, the representative of the German Reich in Romania, Manfred von Kinner, was reporting to Berlin that 4,000 Jews were killed. However, this last number is most likely grossly exaggerated and was just meant to please Hitler. What is known is that the Germans forced the Jews to go by train to the south of Romania, and approximately 1,300 dead Jews were counted on the way, who died because of the July heat and the crowded conditions. So the total number of Jews that died in those days, known communists or not, is most likely under 2,000. The testimony of Dr. Epifani Kozarescu, who was working in Iași in the military hospital ZI 286, also confirms that because of the incident involving the Bolsheviks signaling the Soviet parachutist airplanes, Romanian soldiers gathered 500 Jews at the police, of which the 100 extremist Bolshevik Jews were arrested and sent to jail until the end of the war, and the rest were released by the Colonel Chyrilovsky and the county prefect, Colonel Captaru. The Dr. Epifani Kozarescu also identifies a certain Sturmbannführer named Hermann Ollenberg as the German commander that was not satisfied with the Romanian investigation and ordered more arrests of Jews, some of which were killed for unknown reasons, while the rest were loaded onto trains and sent to a temporary internment camp. An episode that took place when the train reached the town of Roman also confirms that the Romanians had no control over the situation. The Romanian Red Cross approached the trains with food and tea for the Jews, but they were not allowed to get close to the train by the German soldiers. The leader of the local Romanian Red Cross, Verica Garasi, then placed herself in front of the train and refused to move until the Germans allowed the Jews to get help. As a reward, in 1949 the Bolshevik Jews that took over Romania in 1944 confiscated all her possessions, and she was thrown in the streets and practically became a beggar, and her 3 sons were thrown in jail. The German train was finally stopped and the Jews released after the Romanian Queen Helen intervened together with the Romanian General Stefan Ionescu, who informed the Marshal Antonescu about what the Germans were doing, and he approached the German General Eugen von Schorner because Antonescu had no authority over the German troops stationed in Romania. Until that point 1,350 Jews who died because of the heat were counted. 776 Jews reached the internment camp and were held there until the end of the war, when they were all released. To conclude, the so-called Iași pogrom resulted in the arrest of 100 hardcore Bolshevik Jews by the Romanian authorities, which all survived the war unharmed, and with the killing of an unknown number of Jews, a few dozens or hundreds, by the German troops in Iași, and the relocation of about 2,000 others, of which about half died on trains. Both the Germans and the Romanians were at war with the Bolshevik USSR at that time, and reprisals against Bolshevik collaborators were a normal consequence of their betrayal. The only question marks of the whole story are in the thoroughness of the selection process of Bolsheviks from the Jewish population of Iași, and the intentions of the German commanders who ordered the arrested Jews to be loaded in trains and relocated. As mentioned previously, the trials held by the Bolsheviks and the Israelis after the war both supported the Romanian account we just gave, and for decades this story was known and accepted by everyone, Jews, Germans and Romanians. However, later a number of wild allegations started spreading and the number of victims started growing, and today the Jewish quote-unquote historians claim that no less than 14,000 Jews died during those days. Not only do they inflate the number of victims by 10 times, but for reasons which will become clear later they are also trying to portray the Romanians as savage beasts who are all sick of some kind of incurable mental disease known as anti-Semitism, and the persecution, torture and killing of innocent Jews was some kind of national hobby in those days. All kinds of stories have started circulating about the brutality and lack of compassion of not only Romanian soldiers but also of the Romanian civilians of Iași, which all unleashed a bloody and unprovoked genocide against the innocent Jews, simply because the Romanian people is a people of mentally ill persons, all suffering of a mental condition known as anti-Semitism. The Jewish propaganda never mentions the fact that Romania was basically under German occupation and not even the head of state Marshal Antonescu had any power over German soldiers, and claims that the sole responsibility for the deaths of these imaginary 14,000 Jews rests on the shoulders of Marshal Antonescu, who was also infected with the incurable mental disease known as anti-Semitism. Next, we will not analyze any evidence offered by the Romanian authorities, but we will focus exclusively on the quote-unquote evidence provided by the Jewish accusers and see whether or not their own evidence supports their outlandish arguments. We'll start with a mini-documentary pretentiously named The Black Sunday, which was created by the anti-Romanian propaganda machine in order to support the Jewish version that says that the mad Romanians slaughtered 14,000 Jews for no reason.
Carol al II-lea este obligat să abdice și în septembrie Ion Antonescu devine șeful statului și va construi un guvern alcătuit în majoritate de membrii mișcării legionare, iar liderul acestei mișcări, Hoiasima, devine viceprim-ministru.
The producers are implying here that the Iron Guard and Marshal Antonescu were leading Romania during the Iași events. As we have seen earlier, Marshal Antonescu completely removed the Iron Guard from power long before the Iași events.
Mă trag dintr-o casă cu 9 copii, dintre care 6 eram băieți și 3 fete. De acasă ne-au scos pe toți.
As we will soon see, no women and children were arrested, neither by the Romanians nor by the Germans.
Ordinul a fost toți bărbați.
Li s-a transmis prin megafoane, prin mașini cu megafoane care treceau prin cartierele evreiești, ca toți evreii să se ducă la chestură.
Andrei Oistenu is the nephew of the notorious Bolshevik Julian Tirotu, the destroyer of the Romanian culture, which as described in the previous episode, was part of the Judeo-Bolshevik takeover of Romania after 1944. The event he is talking about is a myth with unknown origins, which has never been documented neither by the Germans nor by the Romanians or anyone else. If what he says were true, then a third of the population of Iași, over 30,000 Jews, would have had to be called to the police headquarters and questioned. Neither the Germans nor the Romanians were capable of such a performance, and it would have served no practical purposes. Moreover, if something like this would have happened, then there would have been no need for the Romanians or Germans to go into the streets and gather communist Jews suspected of collaborationism themselves. This is a typical case of self-contradiction between quote-unquote survivor testimonies.
Au fost aduse și femei, au fost aduși și copii și oameni în vârstă. Ori acestora li s-a dat un bilet de vreo 4 pe 4 centimetri cu o stampilă, cu o semnătură acolo și scria liber.
First, photographs of this event exist, and as we have mentioned before, only men were arrested and these photographs attest to this. Not a single woman or child can be observed as being arrested in the hundreds of photographs recording the Iași events, confirming the Romanian and German accounts which say that only Bolsheviks suspected for collaborationism were arrested. We will take a look at these photographs later. Second, we have already mentioned the free passage ticket which was given to the Jews that were not suspected of pro-Bolshevik activities. The very existence of this ticket shows that these events were not a quote-unquote pogrom, but partisan control activities which are normal in any war. If the Romanians really wanted to massacre innocent Jews, they would have received a bullet in the head instead of a ticket proclaiming their innocence.
Și aici au rămas sute de cadavre în curte după ce ne-au scos.
Au fost aceste cadavre duse pe de o parte în gropile săpate cu câteva zile înainte.
No mass graves were dug in Romania before or after this event except the ones where the 1,350 Jews that died on the train were buried. As we mentioned before, not a single one of these accusers has ever been able to pinpoint to a mass grave or any other type of grave of Holocausted Jews in Romania, except for the ones relating to the train ride. This is why, as mentioned earlier, some Jews claimed that the bodies were eaten by stray dogs, all 400,000 of them.
Altele au fost aruncate în gropile de gunoi, altele pur și simplu în apele Bahluiului, pentru că erau mult prea multe cadavre.
Și ne-au înghesuit aici atât din curtea asta de mare, vreo 10.000 de oameni.
10,000 people is 3 times more than the total number of passengers on board of the Titanic. This is the tiny yard of the local police headquarters. As we will see later, it is the same today as it was in 1941. This quote-unquote survivor expects us to believe that 3 Titanics were placed in this tiny yard. At this point in the movie, the quote-unquote survivors start telling about their experiences on the trains the Germans used to send suspected Bolsheviks to the south. The question which nobody asks is why would the Germans want to send the Jews anywhere in the first place? The bullets seemed to do a very good job before. During a war, when the Bolshevik aviation was bombing Iași, we are expected to believe that the Germans spent a huge amount of resources, from manpower to fuel, just to quote, asphyxiate the Jews, when they could very easily just have shot them in the head. The bullet is fast, cheap, and efficient. Actually the bullet is such a good tool for mass murder, that the Bolshevik Jews of the USSR used it intensively to slaughter tens of millions of innocent people. The NKVD killed thousands of Romanian prisoners at the Balti massacre in just a few minutes using the bullet. A similar event took place at Katyn with Polish officers. It seems that the Jewish propaganda is doing its best to try and describe the Germans in Iași as the dumbest and sloppiest people ever, when we all know how efficient the German army was.
Un piegat tânăr care a ieșit cu șapca roșii și făcea semnele astea care se ocupau cu aducerea oamenilor la vagon, că el nu expediază vagoanele fără capacitate, că vagonul e aproape gol și așa au adus încă 40, tot ne-am înghesuit și vagon până ne-au cam 120.
As we have mentioned earlier, not even the head of state, Marshal Antonescu, had the power to give any order to any German soldier. Not only that the German army was not taking orders from any Romanian, but many Romanian troops were under the direct command of German officers, as we have shown here and in other videos. This quote-unquote survivor expects us that a small-time employee of the Romanian railways who could not give any order to anyone in Romania except maybe his wife and kids, all of a sudden started giving orders to the German army. And the Germans actually obeyed him. LOL.
Eu nu știu al câtelea am intrat în vagon, dar la 137 am auzit ordinul: închideți vagonul.
Au oblonit lucrările acelea care erau cu scânduri foarte bine și știu că la un moment s-a auzit o voce ce băi, nu-i bine, vezi că mai intră el pe acolo și au mai bătut o scândură pe situațiile care erau acolo.
Dozens of photographs of these trains exist. Not a single one of them shows any sign of alteration to the train wagons. As we will see, if the train wagon had windows, they were all open. In the July heat this was obviously not enough, but still they were all open.
Vagonul meu și după aceea am aflat că și în altele s-a aflat un strat de vreo 30 cm de bălegar proaspăt, deasupra căruia un strat de centimetru ceva de varne. Pe măsură ce treceau orele, oamenii au început să împuțineze, până când am reușit să număr 30, 20 și am rămas, când am coborât, 8.
Ne-au debarcat în Podiloai. Cât s-a mai rămas? Dacă dintr-un vagon unde am fost 120 de oameni, am coborât 18 sau 20.
It is interesting to see how out of all the quote-unquote survivors, the creators of this movie have managed to find the only two where the number of deaths was drastically different from the rest of the train.
Nu m-am gândit să mă răzbun pe cineva. Eu am iertat pe toată lumea. Atât doresc, nu se mai întâmple așa.
Don't worry, Mr. Survivor. 3 Titanics will never again be squeezed into the tiny yard of the Yassi police headquarters. Never again. The rest of the claims made in this movie are just stories that cannot be proven to be either true or false since there is no evidence to either support or dismiss them, so we will move on. Next, we will take a look at the photographic evidence of the events in Yassi. Again, we will only be looking at quote-unquote evidence provided only by the anti-Romanian propaganda. For this, we will use what seems to be the official website of the Jewish propaganda around these events. The creators of the website claim to be researchers that have used scientific methods to find the truth about these events. They also point out on the first page that the website shows only part of the photographic evidence. On the front page of the website, in an article named The Faces of Evil, a quote-unquote survivor tells how Romanians had a list of Jews that were supposed to be assassinated and somehow knew that all of these Jews were gathered in a certain synagogue and started calling them out by name and killing them in turn. The storyteller then wants us to believe that the Romanians forgot about their orders and instead of killing them decided to beat them with sticks. In the middle of the story, dead bodies of women suddenly appear out of nowhere, while Romanians start decapitating innocent Jews. Like all other creations of the Jewish anti-Romanian propaganda, most of the website is occupied by nonsensical and self-contradictory testimonies such as this one, meant to touch the hearts of readers and make them accept the Jewish side of the story without looking at details and questioning things, since as soon as you start analyzing these claims the whole story falls apart like we have seen in the case of the Black Sunday documentary. So let's move on to the photos exhibited on this website. The vast majority of the pictures selected on this website cannot be used to identify people or locations. In a court of law they would be rejected as evidence since they cannot be used to either support or dismiss the Jewish propaganda version. For example, This picture has also been used as evidence for pogroms that supposedly took place in Poland. This picture is also being used on the internet to describe a crime committed by the NKVD in the USSR. The caption of this photo says that the houses of Christians were marked with crosses a few days before the events. The creators of the website seem to have a problem with Christianity, as we will soon see. As you can see, there are no crosses on these doors. The caption of this photo says that these are dead Jews. We can clearly see that none of them are dead, they are just lying down and waiting. If you look closer, you will see that one of them even received medical care. This photo, taken at the same time, also clearly shows that these are not dead Jews, but are just resting and waiting. This photo says that the Jews in the trains were allowed to take baths. If the goal of the Germans and Romanians was to slaughter Jews, why bother letting them take baths? This photo says that a Romanian gendarme talks with a survivor. If the Romanians wanted to slaughter the Jews, why was this survivor still alive? Why didn't the gendarme just shoot him? A bunch of pictures show survivors lying in the grass waiting. If the goal was to kill them, why did so many of them survive? This photo claims that Romanians are robbing the dead Jews. If we look closer, we see that the ground is scattered with papers, probably IDs which the Romanians were ordered to collect. This picture also claims that Romanians are robbing the corpses. The only thing that we can see here are people gathering corpses and loading them onto a cart. The caption on this picture claims that the Jews were forced to wash away the blood of Jews that were killed during the night. When we look closer, however, we see that all of the Jews are looking for something and are holding their hats in their hands as if they are collecting something from the ground. None of them is washing anything. There are hundreds of photos of the train ride, but the propagandists have selected only those that show Romanian gendarmes, Romanian rail workers or simple Romanian peasants helping out, and have left out any pictures showing German soldiers so that the reader, by now influenced by the heart-touching stories of fictional survivors, are really convinced that for the death of the quote-unquote 14,000 Jews, the guilt rests solely on the shoulders of the racist Romanian army and the genocidal, anti-Semitic, maniacal civilians of Iași. But they did include this picture, probably because it shows only the back of the soldier. It is a German uniform. In 1942 this photo and the other photos of the train ride from Iași circulated around Europe, and everyone knew that the German army organized the relocation of communists by train. This particular photo is taken from an official database of Switzerland and can be found here. As you go through the pictures of the events in Iași, you will see that every Jew arrested there was a man. As we mentioned before, no women and children were arrested, only men who were suspected of collaborationism with the enemy. Moreover, the very existence of these photographs shows that nobody had anything to hide. As the German and Romanian accounts say, this was a normal operation of gathering people who were known or were suspected of having helped the enemy in a time of war. There is nothing shameful about this and is practiced everywhere. If a massacre of innocent civilians was perpetrated, we would surely not have any pictures today to analyze. None of the soldiers you see in these pictures would have wanted to be shown in photographs. But if you look at the photos, nobody cares about the photographer. The fact that the German army allowed a photographer to take these pictures shows that A, the deaths were an accident, or B, these were executions of Bolshevik collaborators. Nobody takes pictures of themselves killing innocent people. Plus, the killing of an innocent civilian was punishable by death in the German army during the war. The website also contains a section showing pictures of mass graves. As expected, these pictures also support the Romanian account and contradict the Jewish propaganda. They are all small mass graves, and the number of bodies buried there is also known and supports the Romanian account, adding up to just above 1,000 people. The Jewish propaganda claims that 14,000 people were killed. The remaining 13,000 were probably eaten by stray dogs. Site creators only managed to find a few dozens of photographs, which nobody can check to see if they really are victims, and have added a lot of pictures from the records of the Labour Ministry, some of them with stamps from Bucharest and not from Iași, and even some from the police records of Iași, showing that some of these Jews really were dangerous Bolsheviks and were being held under observation long before the events of 1941. To try and convince viewers that the stories told on this website are somehow legitimate, the creators also include a page where they show pictures from various Bolshevik trials. These were all notorious masquerades, where the sentence was known before the trial even began, where false evidence was brought, and as we shall soon see, where the accusations changed when the Bolshevik prosecutors were caught lying by the defendants. This type of phony trials are the only ones where the false evidence presented by the Jewish propaganda can be accepted. A page entitled Deciders is also included, where they show pictures of every Romanian that the Jewish propaganda machine hates, from the Marshal Antonescu, which was on the front at that time and only heard about these events later, to members of the Iron Guard, which were at that time had no function and were persecuted as mentioned earlier, to even the former King Charles II, who abdicated a year earlier and was in exile during the Iași events. Moreover, the Jewish propagandists even included pictures of Christian priests which never had anything to do with these events. No evidence is given for the involvement of these people. We are just expected to believe the Jewish anti-Romanian propaganda. The creators of this website were forced to include fictional survivor testimonies which shock gullible people, random photos with all kinds of lies attached to them, etc., because they cannot produce any evidence for the claims that the Romanian army and civilians have massacred 14,000 innocent Jews for no reason. Every single one of the pictures shown there support the version of the Germans and Romanians which we have discussed earlier. As we will soon see, all other accusations of Holocaust brought against the Romanian people are in the same situation. There is a high probability that not all the Jews arrested in those early days of the war were Bolshevik traitors and that some innocent average Jews died. It is indeed sad that average Jews have always had to suffer because of small sects within the Jewish population, especially during wartime when trials are very superficial, but our purpose here is to see which one of the two opposing versions about the Iași events is true. And based on what we have seen here, the only way someone could believe the Jewish version of these events is if you force yourself to ignore all the hard evidence and to blindly believe the wild allegations, outlandish stories and self-contradictory testimonies. The fact that some innocent people might have died is no excuse for fabricating false evidence and for telling lies. P.S. Remember, we have only looked at the quote-unquote evidence offered by the Jewish propaganda machine. The story of the so-called Odessa massacre was brought into spotlight in Romania by a short video produced by an unknown director called Ovidiu Lipan. When he received financing from the National Cinematographic Center, he took the engagement to, quote, make this truth known to the public. So even before he started making his video, he already established what the quote-unquote truth was. In his pseudo-documentary he claims that over 22,000 innocent Jews were slaughtered, sometimes burned alive, for absolutely no reason, under the orders of Marshal Antonescu. The entire pseudo-documentary is based on absolutely no documented evidence except for a testimony of a quote-unquote survivor and a paper written under the direction of Elie Wiesel. In a speech before the launch of the pseudo-documentary, Ovidiu Lipan admitted that his pseudo-documentary is not based on documents and archive images, but on quote-unquote interviews. Elie Wiesel has never been to Odessa and is an exposed fraudster who was caught lying numerous times. His lies about his wartime experiences have been thoroughly exposed, including by Jews themselves, and we will not waste more time on this conman here. Odessa was conquered in 1941 by the Romanian and German armies. The battle, however, did not end with the entrance in Odessa of these armies, but continued a long time because of the numerous partisans hiding in the city's catacombs. These tunnels are over 500 kilometers in length and go to a depth of over 60 meters below sea level. They are so huge and complex that many people got lost in there, and as a result much of the catacombs are today closed to the population. Today these catacombs are part of the Museum of Partisan Glory in Odessa, which celebrates the Judeo-Bolshevik partisan fight against the Romanian army. This is where the Bolsheviks were hiding and conducting their partisan activities, something which is condemned by the international laws of war. As mentioned in previous videos, Bolshevism was 100% Jewish, and when the USSR began its attack on Europe, large hordes of Bolshevik Jews joined the fight against defenseless civilians, such as the Jews of Bessarabia, which we have previously mentioned. In Odessa too, the Judeo-Bolsheviks were organized and attacking the Romanian and German authorities. One of the most important Judeo-Bolshevik paramilitary group was the Jewish Defense League, created in 1909 by the international Jewish terrorist Vladimir Zabotinsky. Hiding in the city catacombs, they would attack the Romanian and German armies and inflict serious casualties. In fact, the battle for Odessa was the bloodiest battle of the Romanian army during World War II, apart from the Battle of Stalingrad, because of these Judeo-Bolshevik partisans. Indeed, in a telegram sent from the area on 3 October 1941, Marshal Antonsky describes how the Jewish NKVD commissars were forcing the Russians to fight to the last man and are destroying the city. On the 22nd of October 1941, these Judeo-Bolsheviks bombed the headquarters of the Romanian army, killing 128 Romanians and 7 Germans, including high-rank officers such as the General Leonid Golgojanu. As in every war, reprisals against the terrorists were ordered. For example, the Counterintelligence Bulletin 213,144 of the 22nd of October says that 15 communist terrorists were executed, including the Jew Moses Viktorovich Vexter, who poisoned 2 German soldiers. Immediately after the terrorist attack, the General Constantin Tristoianu ordered that 100 prisoners be killed as reprisals. A note sent to the Romanian army leadership on the 13th of October says that a total of 417 Judeo-Bolsheviks were killed in total, and that they were left on the place of execution so that the other partisans could see them. After hearing about the terrorist attack, Marshal Antonsky issued the Order 526 of the 23rd of October 1941, asking that 200 communists were executed for each dead officer and a further 100 communists executed for each dead soldiers. There were 17 officers and 35 soldiers, the rest being civilians. That means that according to the orders of Antonsky, 6,900 Bolsheviks should have been executed. The Jewish propaganda machine claims that because of this order 22,000 innocent civilians were executed. This is obviously impossible, since the Romanian army, having arrived just 6 days before, could not have identified and gathered 22,000 Jews during one night, from a city of 300,000 people. If the Chinese army was sent today in New York, for example, it would not be able to gather more than a dozen Jews in one night using just flashlights and no names, addresses or pictures. The order of Antonsky was not carried out completely. Moreover, the Bolsheviks gathered and executed were not racially selected. These were Russians, Ukrainians, Romanians, Jews, and all kind of nationalities. At his phony Bolshevik trial in 1946, Marshal Antonsky pointed out that the order he gave said nothing about any Jew. His order was about partisans. It is not known exactly how many Bolsheviks were executed that day. The estimates range from a few hundred to a few thousands. It is also not known how many of the executed Bolsheviks were Jewish. Order number 212,995 of the 4th Romanian Army from the 24th of October 1941 says that these partisans were judged and sentenced according to the international laws relating to warfare on dry land. The same order says that those executed were either NKVD officers or people dressed as civilians but caught with weapons. The execution of Bolsheviks following terrorist attacks is not the same with an unprovoked slaughter against thousands and thousands of innocent Jews. As for the average Jews of Odessa, the same order number 562 of Antonscu said that they were to be gathered in a ghetto to be later relocated, and not killed. The relocation of the Jews was done because terrorist attacks and partisan fights continued even after the Romanian army headquarters were bombed and reprisal actions were taken, so it was actually a measure that guaranteed the safety of the average Jews of Odessa. Historians' estimates for the number of executions range from a few hundreds to a few thousands, but it could not have been above 1,000 or 2,000 judging by the situation in the city and the reports of the army commanders. More important, these victims were not quote-unquote innocent Jews, but were either known partisans, NKVD officers, or Bolsheviks that were caught with weapons, and they were of all nationalities of Odessa. However, a more serious incident took place in the village of Dalnik, outside Odessa. Here, a gendarmerie colonel, Kokonikilsku, killed 1,300 innocent civilians of unknown ethnicity, as a response to the terrorist attacks of Odessa. He was however acting on his own initiative, probably out of revenge, and did not receive any orders for such a crime. He was later judged and condemned for this act. At the 1946 phony Bolshevik trial, Marshal Antonscu was accused of the crime committed by Kokonikilsku, but the Bolshevik accusers raised the death toll to 25,000 people. Not Ukrainians or Russians, but all Jewish. Using simple mathematic calculations, Marshal Antonscu exposed the lies of the Judeo-Bolsheviks and shown that it was mathematically impossible for so many people to be placed inside those buildings, and as a result the accusers immediately lowered the death toll from 25,000 to 5,000, in the middle of the trial. The truth is that witnesses estimate the number of civilians killed by Kokonikilsku to be somewhere around 1,300, and he was acting on his own accord, without any orders from superiors, and for this he was punished. The 22,000 number mentioned by the Jewish propaganda machine comes from the propaganda machine of the USSR towards the end of World War II, and has been used by anti-Romanians ever since, with no evidence to support it. Like in the case of Yassi, the alleged 22,000 bodies of Holocausted Jews have disappeared completely, probably eaten by stray dogs as well. As described here and in previous videos, Romania was at war with Bolshevism. Not just with the Bolsheviks of the USSR but also with the Bolsheviks within the country, which were betraying the country and siding with the enemy. The vast majority of both foreign and domestic Bolsheviks were Jewish, as shown throughout the last few episodes. On top of the sabotage and propaganda activities that the Judeo-Bolsheviks were doing in Romania came the genocide committed by Jews against Romanians during the 1940 to 1941 Bolshevik occupation of Bessarabia and Bukovina, when the Jews joined the Bolsheviks en masse and caused the deaths of over 10% of the Romanian population through assassinations, deportations to the gulags, etc. When the leader of the Jewish community in Romania, Wilhelm Filderman, asked about the relocation of Bessarabian Jews, Marshal Antonscu published a response on the 19th of October 1941 in which he goes through all the atrocities committed by Bolshevik Jews from Bessarabia and Bukovina against defenseless Romanians a year earlier. Like everywhere in the world in times of war, Marshal Antonscu took the measure of relocating some of the Jews that lived in Bessarabia and Bukovina and in some other areas close to the Eastern Front. Most of the relocations were done from areas where the Bolshevik Jews were a serious threat and where they proved that they cannot be trusted and were siding with the enemy. From the rest of the country only those Jews who were known to be dangerous Bolshevik agitators and traitors were relocated. Some Romanians, Gypsies, and other people that posed a threat to the Romanian state during the war were also relocated to Transnistria. The relocation of Jews took place mainly because the Jewish leaders refused or were incapable of collaborating with the Romanian state in identifying and controlling Bolshevik Jewish traitors from within their communities. Transnistria was the old Romanian territory from where Romanians were ethnically cleansed during the previous centuries, especially during the Judeo-Bolshevik rule following the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution, and culminating with the Ukrainian mass famine. The people that were relocated to Transnistria were placed in proper homes and not in camps or ghettos. The Jews that were relocated were autonomous and were led by their own leaders and were free to leave for Russia. They were even guarded by Romanian gendarmes, to protect them from the Ukrainians, as we will soon see. Jews relocated in Transnistria lived better lives than the majority of Romanians. There were at that time over 1.5 million refugees in Romania, who fled from the territories occupied by Stalin and Hitler because of the Hungarian and Jewish anti-Romanian genocides of 1940. The anti-Romanian propagandists have advanced many contradictory figures for the number of Jews that were supposedly exterminated in Transnistria, so we don't really know how many Jews Romania is supposed to have holocausted there. But since apart from the Yasi events there were no other mass deaths of Jews throughout the war, the bulk of the 400,000 Jews that the Jewish propaganda machine is claiming were holocausted by Romania is supposed to have happened in Transnistria. This means that according to their own claims, over 350,000 Jews are supposed to have been holocausted in Transnistria. From the start, this is impossible since this number is 3 times higher than the actual number of Jews, Romanians and Gypsies that were relocated to Transnistria, according to the army's official records. So from the onset, the accusation is proven to be a blatant lie. But let's dig deeper into the Transnistrian issue. The relocations were done orderly and with a view of protecting the innocent Jews and their wealth. For example, an order relating to a relocation of Jews issued by the mayor of Suceava, a town in southern Bukovina, on the 9th of October 1941 said the following. The Jews were informed they should take warm clothing and food, they should leave the weapons to the gendarmerie, write down an inventory of personal belongings that they left in Suceava, and together with the keys of the house it should be left to the Commission for Safekeeping. The order also says that anyone who will try to steal the wealth that the Jews leave behind will be shot. Because of the lies of the Jewish propaganda machine, in 1943, 3 international commissions were formed and visited the villages in Transnistria where the Jews were relocated. The Romanian government offered all the help they needed to find out the truth about the imaginary holocausted Jews. None of the 3 reports say anything about any holocausted Jews. The only deaths mentioned there were normal deaths due to old age or sickness. These commissions were formed by neutral third parties: the Vatican, the International Red Cross, and the Embassy of Switzerland. All 3 exposed the lies of the Jewish propaganda machine. Wilhelm Filderman, the head of the Romanian Jewish community, was also under the influence of this false propaganda and kept criticizing Marshal Antonescu, until one day when Antonescu relocated Filderman himself. He was brought back to Romania after a few months, and after seeing the truth with his own eyes he never again mentioned the so-called Holocaust of Transnistria. On the contrary, as we shall see later, he became one of the most important defenders of Romania in face of the lies of the international Jewish propaganda machine. In his book called The Gegendorf Foundry, the Jews Villarin, who was deported to Transnistria, describes the living conditions there. He never mentions any extermination or bad treatment. He even writes that Antonescu paid Jewish professionals with 2 German marks per day and low-skilled laborers with 1 mark per day during their stay in Transnistria. The Jews were governing themselves, in normal towns and villages, not camps. They had kindergartens, schools, hospitals, they received mail and packages from anywhere in the world, etc. And the Jewish leaders were responsible for keeping discipline in these communities. No mass graves exist in Transnistria, no ovens, no extermination camps, nothing. The relocation was for the good of both Romania and the average Jews who were suffering because of the Bolsheviks among them. In fact, the very existence of a relocation program shows that Antonescu had no criminal intentions. If he wanted to quote-unquote exterminate the Jews, he could have done it very easily in Romania, without spending so much time and resources to send them away, in a time where the Romanian nation was fighting a war that was crucial for its very existence. The relocation of Jews and others to Transnistria cannot be compared with the mass deportations of Romanians done by Bolshevik Jews in Bessarabia and Bukovina in the previous year. These latter deportations were done into the Bolshevik gulags, which were really extermination machines where hundreds of thousands of Romanians were worked to death. A little over 100,000 Jews were relocated to Transnistria during the war. The vast majority came back at the end of the war. The few deaths that occurred were mostly due to sickness, such as typhus, or other natural causes such as old age, and crucially, as we shall see, due to the revenge of some Ukrainians for what the Jews did to them in the 1930s. For example, from Bucharest only 300 Jews were deported, all of them identified as notorious Bolsheviks, of which 290 came back at the end of the war. In a study presented in Stockholm in 1957, Wilhelm Filderman, the head of the Jewish community of Romania, said that over 80% of the Jews sent to Transnistria came back at the end of the war. In fact, the Jewish population exploded after the war because the Jews returned to Romania. In 1930, 69,885 Jews lived in Bucharest, but in 1947 150,021 Jews were counted. The fact that the vast majority of the Jews that lived in the central and western part of Romania were not relocated shows that the relocations program was part of a fight against Bolshevism and not racially motivated. If it was some kind of anti-Semitic program, all Jews would have been relocated from all over Romania, not just those that were living next to the eastern border. The fact that other nationalities were sent there is also evidence that this had nothing to do with the so-called Jewish Holocaust. For example, when the Western Bolsheviks of the USA and Britain were bombarding the innocent civilians of Bucharest, during the night the lights were all turned off in the city. All the gypsies that were caught stealing from houses and robbing people during those nights were also sent to Transnistria, as Marshal Antonescu testified at his phony Bolshevik trial of 1946. After the war, the Judeo-Bolsheviks that took over Romania in 1944 forged documents to show that a so-called Holocaust took place in Transnistria, such as a report attributed to Raduleka, who was a governmental officer that was dealing with Jewish issues. This fake report is written by hand, it is not dated, contains no official information like all government documents did, and contains lots of grammatical and orthography errors, showing that it was not written by Raduleka, who was an expert in many languages, but by someone who did not speak Romanian properly. Moreover, that fake document also mentions relocations that took place in January 1941 when the relocations actually started only in September 1941. At the phony trial of Marshal Antonescu in 1946, Raduleka was not brought as a witness to testify about this fake document, but because of this forgery he was sentenced to life in prison. It is important to note that after the creation of the War Refuge Board in the USA, the Romanian government asked its ambassadors to the Western countries to approach wealthy Western Jews in order to finance the Romanian government's program of facilitating the emigration of Jews to Palestine during the war. Most of the rich Western Jews, however, refused to finance the leasing of boats so that the average Jews of Romania and those that escaped from other countries controlled by Hitler could emigrate to Palestine. As a result, Much of the financing for the emigration of hundreds of thousands of Jews from Romania to Palestine was financed by the Romanian state and by wealthy Jews from Romania. Like all other accusations before, we can say that the so-called Transnistrian Holocaust is also a monstrous lie. But why would the Jews continue to spread these lies even 70 years after the war? The answer comes by studying the testimonies of people which were directly involved in events in Transnistria, such as the Jewish journalist Vasily Grossman. He was a war correspondent who personally went into Transnistria towards the end of the war. He completely debunks the lies of the Jewish propaganda machine and gives some interesting insights into those events. He writes that after the Romanian and German armies liberated Ukraine, the Ukrainians started attacking the Jews that were left behind. For example, he writes about some Ukrainians in the village of Demanevka who were caught by the Romanian authorities after executing Jews and were taken to Tiraspol for trial. He writes that tens of thousands of Jews from Odessa were executed by Ukrainians in Demanevka until the Romanian authorities intervened, and the surviving Jews were then helped by the Jewish community of Romania. So as mentioned before, we can see that, apart from diseases, the deaths of a small percentage of the Jews relocated to Transnistria was also due to Ukrainian assassinates. The crucial thing here, however, is not who killed Jews but why. If people would hear that the Ukrainians killed Jews in World War II, they will start asking why. And when they start researching these issues, they will also hear about the Ukrainian genocide commanded by the Bolshevik Jews in Moscow and implemented by Bolshevik NKVD agents, the majority of which were Jewish. Apart from their hatred and xenophobia, and the attempts at extorting money from the Romanian state, this is the main reason why the international Jewish propaganda machine continues to accuse Romania of committing a genocide against the Jews. They are forced to resort to all kinds of lies and forgeries to maintain the myth of the so-called Romanian Holocaust alive, because if someone starts investigating the events of Transnistria, they will immediately find out about the Ukrainian Holodomor and the fact that Bolshevism was created by Jews and implemented by Jews. And when people hear that communism is 100% Jewish, they will continue their research in the history and present of the worldwide Jewish community, and the entire ugly history and present of Jews will come to light. And if these truths would ever reach the mainstream media on a large scale, it would have catastrophic consequence for worldwide Jews, guilty or not. If the alleged Holocaust of Romania was true, to get compensation money from Romania, the State of Israel could simply take Romania to the International Court in Hague. But during such a trial, these ugly truths about the history of Jews in Europe would also be unveiled. The truth is that Romania is the only country in the world that ever helped the Jews without being controlled or influenced by Jewry. In spite of the anti-Romanian genocide committed by Bolshevik Jews in Bessarabia and Bukovina and all the other troubles created for Romania by Jews, and although Romania was carved up by Hitler and was filled with German armies, the emigration of Romanian and European Jews to Palestine in the West was a state policy during World War II. In Romania, Jewish schools, synagogues, and press functioned normally during the war. The Barassum Theatre in Bucharest was the only Jewish theatre still open in Hitler's Europe during the war. The leaders of the Jewish community such as Alexandru Safran and Wilhelm Filderman had unrestricted access to Marshal Antonescu. Romania was the only country under the influence of Hitler that not only that it did not send Jews to the Western concentration camps, but also helped them leave Europe. In a time when the leaders of the European Jews were betraying their own people and were forming the so-called Judenrat organizations which were creating lists of Jews from their own communities to be sent to concentration camps, Marshal Antonescu stood up to Hitler and never allowed any Jew from Romania to be sent to the West. He was also issuing passports for thousands and thousands of Jews from the West and from the part of Transylvania that was occupied by Hungary. For these Jews, Romania was the only gateway out of Europe during World War II, Thanks to Antonescu and other leaders and politicians like Iuliu Maniu, Ion Mihalac, Mihai Antonescu, George Alexanu and others. As a reward, all of them would be imprisoned and executed after the war by the Judeo-Bolsheviks that took over Romania in 1944. Romania had 700,000 Jews before the war, of which over 400,000 emigrated to Palestine during the war. Thanks to the influx of Jews from other parts of Europe, at the end of the war, excluding the occupied part of Transylvania, Romania had more Jews than it had at the start of the war. No explanation about this population rise is given in the anti-Romanian propaganda. Moreover, the Elie Wiesel Commission started giving $10,000 prizes to anyone who denounced people who helped exterminate Jews. While many such denunciations were made in Central European countries, the grand total of denunciations in Romania was zero. Furthermore, even though the Enigma Code of the Germans was broken and the Bolshevik Jews controlled Romania after 1944 and had access to all the government's paperwork, not a single order for the killing or injuring of innocent Jews was ever found. Indeed, so thankful was the Jewish community of Romania that the financing of the Council of Patronage, created at the initiative of the wife of Marshal Antonescu to help poor people and especially the 1.5 million Romanian refugees from the occupied areas of Romania, received a lot of its financing from wealthy members of the Romanian Jewish community. Antonescu refused systematically to send any Jews to the West. A famous such episode took place when the Germans sent a train with 15 carriages to load Jews from Bucharest, but it was forced to go back to Germany empty. In 1955, Wilhelm Filderman, the president of the Federation of Jewish Communities during the war, said, quote, "During the period of Hitler's domination in Europe, I was in permanent contact with Marshal Antonescu. He did everything he could to soften the treatment of Jews who were persecuted by the Nazis. I must underline that the Romanian population is not anti-Semitic. I was witness to touching scenes of solidarity between Romanians and Jews. Marshal Antonescu successfully resisted the Nazi pressure. I'll remind you a few examples. Thanks to the intervention of Antonescu, the deportation of over 20,000 Jews from Bukovina was stopped. He gave blank passports to the Jews of Hungary whose lives were in danger. Thanks to his policies, the property of Jews was put under provisory administration, making them seem lost and thus conserving them for a return at the right moment. I mention all these in order to underline that the Romanian people, with the limited control it had over the country, demonstrated feelings of humanity and political moderation." End quote. Moshe Carmeli Weffenberger, chief rabbi of Cluj during the war, a town in the part of Transylvania occupied by Hungary, said in 1988, quote, "Incontestably, in southern and central Europe existed a single way for Jews to get out of the circle of fire of the Nazi terror. The Jewish refugees arriving in Romania from Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary had the chance to leave to Palestine through Romanian ports. No matter how you look at things and no matter how you analyze the situation of Jews in Romania, from a political and international point of view, one thing is certain. That in a time when the planet was passively watching the spectacle of the destruction of European Jews, Romania was willing to receive Jewish refugees and was ready to open its maritime ports for them." End quote. Alexandru Safran, chief rabbi of Romania during the war, said this in 1995 about George Alexanu, the governor of Transnistria, quote, "Throughout his entire life and professional activity, and especially during the dark times of the war, George Alexanu did so much for the Jewish community of Romania from his heart and totally disinterested. He paid a horrible price at communist command." End quote. Neoli Grunberg, a Jewish historian, said, quote, "There was no Holocaust in Romania because the swastika-wearing henchmen, with very few exceptions, not only that they did not get any help, but they were also faced with a categorical refusal to organize deportations or other genocidal actions." The goal of the relocations in Transnistria was not meant to exterminate Jews, neither officially nor in private. End quote. During a visit in Romania in 2010, the President of Israel Shimon Peres said, quote, "We will never forget that Romania defied the Nazis and saved the lives of 400,000 Jews." End quote.
Moetzet Yesha, in conjunction with My Israel, has arranged an instruction day for wiki editors. The goal of the day is to teach people how to edit in Wikipedia, which is the #1 source of information today in the world. As a way of example, if someone searches the Gaza flotilla, we want to be there. We want to be the guys who influence what is written there, how it's written, and to ensure that it's balanced and Zionist in nature.
I came here to learn more about how we as Israelis and as Jews can defend Israel online, on the internet, and particularly in Wikipedia in this case.
Thank you.